Cash flow is not going to make you rich with real estate by itself. So today we're going to go over some common formulas for calculating your cash flow pre-deal. So you'll kind of know what some of the things to look at when you're going to calculate what your property would cash flow if you buy it at the current price, repair, and so on. So first thing we're going to talk about is NOI, which is net operating income. And I am reading off notes because I don't want to tell you guys anything wrong. So net operating income is all your expenses minus your gross income. So that's number one. That's definitely for single family. That's not so much a term used. That's more of a multifamily or even just a regular business. But just get familiar with it, net operating income. Then you got debt services, which is like your mortgages and other payments that you may have. I don't know, for like a single family, what other payments you would have outside of your mortgage. You get it escrowed. If you get it escrowed, that means the taxes and insurance automatically go out. If you're not a person that's good about tracking them or making sure they get paid, you definitely want to escrow them. I escrow all my properties at this point. I haven't been advised by anybody that knows more than me not to do it, but that's one thing. So one of the things that you'll have to consider when buying a property is what they call vacancy. Now vacancy, or they go on vacancy rate, is the percent or time that your property is empty. Now this could be from multiple different reasons. It can be you have it on the market to be rented out, you're doing repairs, maybe you just don't have a tenant in place at the time. Anytime that you do not have somebody in your property, it is considered vacant. So just remember that vacancy is definitely something you want to keep in consideration. In most of my properties, at least expect a month of vacancy. And the reason I say that is because sometimes you don't get long-term tenants, you just get year to year. And when they move out, you would have to consider the time you have to go back in and make repairs. Sometimes it can take a couple days, or maybe even a week or so, depending on different things like, if they busted out windows and stuff, obviously it's going to be more of a repair. But if it's just like paint, clean it up, it'd be a couple days. Then you get it back on the market. Hopefully you can get it rented out in a couple weeks. So that's your vacancy. So some of the other things is what they call capital expenditures. So this is like major repairs like foundations, roof, HVAC system, electricity, plumbing, something that may be like a major repair. Now ideally we want to move into these properties with all them things already fixed. If we need new HVAC, we put a new HVAC in there. If we need a new roof, put a new roof on. I know a lot of times you can fix roofs time and time again until they fail. If it makes sense and you got a good roof guy, you can repair a roof. If you need a new roof, sometimes you just got to bite the bullet and get a new roof. But if you're purchasing the property with a bad roof, you should consider that in your price. Definitely consider that in your price. All the major things I just talked about in CapEx are by far the most important things when you're purchasing a property. If they're not fixed, make sure that you equate for that in your numbers. So with CapEx, then you'll want to, I don't do this, but some people do it, is property management. That can be 10%. I don't have a problem with the 10% month paying if it makes sense. But I do have a problem with is a lot of upfront costs. If you are out of state, definitely this is something you have to have in place. If you just don't feel like it's something you can do, definitely do that. But with property management, it's not like they're going to do 100% of the work. They really just pass a lot of that responsibility onto you to make the final decision. Whatever, it does take a little work out of your hands, especially when trying to get a unit filled. They can become very valuable. Not against them. I just at this point do not use them. So then also let's review. You've had vacancy, CapEx, and then property management. You will also want to put back a certain amount for just general repairs, such as new toilet, maybe drywall repair, flooring repair. A lot of this stuff won't be a big issue if you went in and already repaired it, but in some of your properties, it doesn't make sense to go over and do a complete rehab. I bought a property about 4 years ago that I continue to put a little bit of work in every year. I put a little more work in it than I want to. I'll just be completely honest, but it still cash flows well. I don't lose money on it. It appreciates very well. It's just I know that some of the things are coming, and I'm prepared to that. So I put that 15 to 20% to the side for when them things do come. I have that money set aside. So with them things in itself, I would set back about 30% of your cash flow. So if you cash flow about, if you got the property paid off, you might cash flow $1,000 a month. Take $300 of that just to the side for all them things I just talked about: CapEx, vacancy, repairs, and property management. Now keep in mind, CapEx and repairs are not the same thing. So just keep that in mind. Have a reserve for both of them because they are separate things. So we'll go over just a couple of the formulas that people use. I've talked about it on the channel before. Is the 1% rule. 1% is basically you're renting it out for 1% of what you have into the property. So $100,000 property, you would have to rent it out for $1,000 to meet that 1% requirement. So that's 100% all in. That's 100,000 all in. So if you buy it for 70, put 30 into it, you're at 100,000. For the 1% rule to be successful, you would have to rent it out for 1,000, and that's with tenants paying utilities. So just keep that in mind. It's a rule, a philosophy. It is not something that you have to do. It is something to the minimum of most investors I know. It is their main metric. It's not my main metric, but none of my deals go against it. Just say, so I always meet the 1% rule. Then there's the 50% rule. I'm not exactly used this rule before, so I will go ahead and read this and explain what my thought is on it, and if I do meet that criteria. But the 50% rule states that a rental property's net cash flow should be at least 50% of its gross minus the mortgage payment. So these are similar rules as the 1% rule. I can't calculate if I meet the 50% rule in any of my properties, but the net cash flow, 50% of the gross rent, I can tell you that I do. But it's not a metric I use when I'm looking at properties. And then there's a 70% rule. The 70% rule states that the purchase price should be less than 70% of the after repair value minus cost. Now the 70% rule is the rule that I use on my properties. So I will go over this again. The rule states that the purchase price should be 70% less than the ARV after repair value minus the repair cost. So this doesn't necessarily play into your cash flow. This more plays in just the overall value of how you buy a house. So cash flow wise, you can still meet this metric of the 70% rule and not cash flow. So you have to be careful with following that system. So after your all-in costs, you still got to make sure at the very least you make that 1% rule. The 70% and the 1% rule together will get you exactly where you need for cash flow. Now the problem with all this is we run our numbers too tight. So on paper, I say, oh, well, this all meets the 1% rule. And then it doesn't. That's a problem. Oh, this meets the 70% rule. Then it doesn't. So, and this could go for experienced investors or even people with less experience. Give yourself a little wiggle room, especially when that 1% rule, really, that's really shouldn't be that hard. You should be able to find what the rent in the area is pretty easy. But if you can't, just always be a little more on the conservative side when you're running these numbers. Don't sell yourself a bad property because you easily can. Especially if you're paying cash, because when you're paying cash, you don't have to meet the criteria of a mortgage broker or a mortgage company. When you are financing these things, they do a lot of due diligence themselves to make sure that they're not making a bad deal on their half. So just be cautious be conservative with your numbers. Just to also remember cash flow. You have to consider something like an eviction, which you don't necessarily put that in your numbers, but that is always something that could come up. That's why you charge security deposits and try to get the best possible tenant in your properties. But that always don't work out. Evictions is not something that anybody wants, but it is something that happens. So always consider that as well, because one eviction could, if you have very narrow numbers, one eviction can kill your cash flow for a whole year. So just consider that. So we'll just recap real quick. You got the 50% rule, the 1% rule, the 70% rule. Figure out which one you want to use. They all work. So, that's that. When you're doing that, just remember your net operating income, your debt services, your vacancy rates, your property management fees, your CapEx, and your repairs. So just remember all that stuff, and then you should be pretty good. And I was just talking to somebody. Sometimes some of the properties in rougher areas or areas that doesn't have the highest property values and stuff like that, they usually cash flow a little better. But don't let that be your only reason for getting there. Like, oh man, that house is $50,000. I happen to have that. There might be a reason the house is $50,000. Just remember that. I buy properties all over the place, so I don't have a problem with that. Just keep in mind, sometimes the higher the cash flow, the more work that has to go into it, whether it's repairs, CapEx, or even I've ran into situations where property managers won't even manage in that part of the city, or even some cities in general. I found in Indiana, you'll call around and they'll like, we do a 1 to 2 block radius. I've been told that that's illegal for them to say that, but they say it. So just for your information, they do say it. And that's where sometimes if the numbers do get tight, people try to save money is by doing their own property management. That's not necessarily the reason I do it. I don't find that once you have processes that it's not that hard. But what I have found is now that I'm getting into the area of 8, 7, 8, 9 properties or units, that it's slowing me down to do some of the property management myself. So it's something that I've looked to either start my own property management company or hire one out. Either way, that's part of the business. So that's something I'm working on myself. So if you guys have any questions about cash flow and how I evaluate cash flow, let me know down in the comments. If this channel's brought you any value, like, subscribe, and share. And let me know what else you guys want to hear, because I think next we'll do something on like a debt pay down or appreciation / equity, and how them different things will work. So this is just part 1 of evaluating properties that I'm going to go over. So let me know what you guys want to talk about next. Follow for that next video.